First thing to say is happy birthday, Maria.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, Carl.
So, dear listener, our listener now knows when your birthday is, so I'll expect you'll get next year flowers and chocolates and puppies and all sorts of things on your birthday.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah, because we know people only listening to this when you're with us. The viewing figures go down at least 99% when you're not with us. So it's good to have you, and happy birthday. So this week we're going to cover a couple of things. We're going to chat about the session we had earlier in the week, talking about future of work. Then we're going to talk a little bit about where this is all taking us. So we're carrying on our sort of review of where we are, and so we're going to have a chat about that, and then we'll have a few minutes just at the end to discuss ED&I and the session we're having this week. So the session this week, Future of Work, really, really good session. I think lots of new things came out of it. Actually, I think it shows the maturing of the discussions. We sort of covered the predictable bases, and now we're getting more into where things are truly heading and people's thoughts. Perhaps, Maria, it's your birthday. Do you want to kick us off? Give us some of your reflections on that discussion.
Well, I do agree, Carl. We started off in the conversation around 4-day week, flexible working, remote working, and I think these are all topics that many companies are grappling with. So it's a definitely a live discussion for many people, but I think in our minds it just sort of is the base camp of where we're going. And so having sort of talked through that a bit with the group and learning about their experiences, ranging from, we had companies in the group that have really successfully adopted the 4-day week.
Sure.
And we're able to speak about that experience. Companies that have successfully adopted, or let's say built and designed for remote working, and some of the challenges around that. Mm-hmm. And companies as well trying to adopt more remote working and grappling with this with the idea of the office always being the answer to things, but the answer to what? So then I think that started to get us a bit deeper into, well, what is the office always the answer to?
Correct.
And that's where we started to see, I think, some of the themes coming out around starting off talking through collaboration. And I know this was a point that Stuart was really passionate about, and then actually moving then more into connectedness and the social contract that exists between employer, employee, and each other, actually, and holding each other accountable. So yeah, it was really a fascinating discussion, touching on many different points. I think what I took, one of the things that I definitely took away from it was the sort of potential tension that exists between kind of this encouragement of bringing yourself to work and belonging to work as yourself, which we see work and people that are moving into work now are looking to do, is to bring their work as part of themselves. And that tension that exists between that and companies saying, yes, do that, but also assimilate and subscribe. We want you to do. Come to the office 2 days, Mondays and Thursdays. Don't sort of work from home on these days, or if you work from home, you must do this and that. So there's definitely, I think, a bubbling tension there that workers and employees probably need to grapple with. What's the balance between belonging and assimilation into perhaps a culture that isn't entirely yours. It doesn't need to be.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think you introduced the thought of employees bringing their own brand to work. Young people tend to have a brand, what you could say, call a brand identity of what they are and what they stand for. Whether that's led totally by social media or not, I don't know. But I think that was an interesting concept, actually, that people bringing themselves to work as a package that they have identified, and they are quite confident about.
Yeah, and it sounds really superficial or vacuous to say, "Oh, personal brand," but actually, many of these people who are entering into the world of work, they have curated themselves online. They've spent many hours investing in themselves in various ways. Video editing, kind of showing who they want to be and who they want to show, what they want to show in an online capacity, the rest of the world. And I think whether you agree with it or not, whether you think it's silly or not, that's a thing that exists, and I don't think it can be ignored. I think the other thing, sorry, just before you move on to Stuart, is this idea about, which obviously we talk about a lot, about where does the kind of responsibility get held within organizations. And the future of work discussion was really interesting, and it reminded me when I used to do quite a bit of keynote speaking and training. We used to do this exercise around what's your travel and expenses policy, and this was always a really good benchmark as to the kind of level of trust and responsibility that was given to employees. So you'd have sort of, on the one end, I mean, I work with startups whose travel and expenses policy is, do the right thing by the business. That was it. And then other organizations, I think the worst one I had was let's say like a Whitehall type organization. And that was about 12,000 words long. This travel and expenses policy it was just horrendous. So if we're gonna kind of cultivate this culture of bring yourself to work, be autonomous, to allow people to take responsibility, you kind of got to look at, when you're an employer, how you do that. Because if you're doing that at the same time as kind of having a 12,000 word travel and expenses policy, then you're going to create tension.
So I think there's a couple of things you set up there about bringing yourself to work, and should employees adapt to the individual and trust that you've just set Stuart Bromley up beautifully.
Yeah.
I can see him jumping. So I'm going just to hold him back a little bit and just build on a couple of those points. I thought it was also interesting on that personal brand that you've got more people coming into business now with things like ADHD, which came into the conversation a lot, and other elements of their life that they are more aware of and they are bringing in. And it's interesting because it challenges organizations in a different way. Certainly, I think that one of the people quoted the amount of ADHD coming into the business as being really, really high. And there's some skepticism around that because some people are diagnosed, some people self-diagnose, et cetera. But these are real issues. It's the same dynamic you're talking about. These are real issues, and they've got to come into a business, and they should come into a business. Dyslexia and all the other things that should come in. So I think people are perhaps being more confident as they come into a business. I've certainly heard that from a lot of the people I work with, that people are more self-aware, more confident of what they need and what they don't need when they come into a business. And that's a real challenge for organisations, I think. So Stuart, what were your thoughts on the session?
Yeah. I mean, fantastic session again. I think we did get into this individuality thing. I think the direction of travel has been, companies with singular policies, that are designed to try and fit everyone. So one size fits all. But invariably, it's, as I always quote, one size fits nobody. But they're probably best intentions. We had examples on Tuesday where there was companies now breaking that down by job family, so different job families having unique policies to allow them to get more flexibility, more benefits, and they address equity because they may offer different things in the total comp package to different job families. So it's not as though, yes, one might get something different to another, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily better overall. It'll be compensated for somehow. But the point is that they're trying to flex their policies from being a one size fits all to one size fits each job family. And clearly the direction of travel, if you keep on pushing the boundaries on this, will be you'll individually contract with every individual based off of their skills, their capabilities, their needs, their aspirations. It'll be down to contract at an individual level, right? And actually, I think that's pretty much where we've even been on customer experience, right? Customer experience was, one size fits no one, to then some form of segmentation where you might treat different segments differently to companies now that talk about segments of one, right? I think it's the same with employees. And of course, as you just said, this is highly complex for businesses, but both customers and employees have choices, right? They can vote with their feet. They have, much more choice these days than probably they've ever had, and therefore, if they don't like what they're getting or what the proposal is, they can probably go somewhere else, right? So, and that's true for like I say, employees and customers. The one thing that doesn't have a choice, of course, is the planet. So back to responsibility. You can't avoid the fact that whichever way you play the complexity of the decisions to drive responsibility as your broader business across all your stakeholders, shareholders included, employees, customers, etc. All of these people have choices, right? But the planet doesn't, and therefore that's a bit of a rub that says you've got to do the right thing when it comes to the planet, else no one will do, and it's all going to fall apart, right?
It's interesting, Stuart. You're totally right about that. Listening to you there, are we getting to a point where some people are coming into businesses and they are restricting the choices or the options, or they're restricting what they are capable of, what they will do, and I wonder if that's where some of the pushback is coming from.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we see that, and again, and you'd argue whether it's for the right reasons. Clearly, again, tackling the complexities might be difficult, but some of these companies that, for example, on the hybrid working are sort of dictating, employees come into the office 2 or 3 days a week, as an example. Again, that's a dictate. It doesn't actually work for anybody. And you ask, why they're doing this, and they often, and we know this, Carl, they often talk about collaboration, which we debated long and hard on Tuesday. And collaboration is just a nonsense. You could have two people sat next to each other in an office all day long, but they don't collaborate, right? You can have two people and the other side of the planet, and they could collaborate all day long, right? So it is not to do with location, right? And that's why we moved away on the conversation from collaboration to connectedness. It's important people can connect when they need to, how they need to. Obviously, different people need to collaborate in different ways at different times, and therefore, ensuring there's connectedness and a shared sense of purpose and belonging, absolutely key. Get it? That's important. But enforcing, dictating everyone coming to the office 2-3 days a week, is a sledgehammer and doesn't actually fix the issue at all, right? That's not the answer, right? No. So it's interesting to see that companies are adopting sort of, I guess, unilateral policies and processes, which just is not going to work, right? It just isn't.
I agree with you. I think that conversation around connectedness was really interesting, because there's a lot more to that. As we talked about and discussed, that if you're connected to people, you feel you may have a conversation, and people will leak body language, etc. But they'll do that over the coming days. So if you are with people, you do get a feel for, oh, hang on, that's not gone well, or we certainly, a lot of the stuff I've done in the past has been working very much on reflected thought. So what people think at a meeting and a discussion like this will change as they reflect on it, which is the right thing to do. And I wonder if some of that reflective thought and the outcomes of that reflective thought we miss when we talk to someone for 40 minutes or 30 minutes on a call, and then we don't see them again. What are your thoughts on that, Maria?
I think that is true. But I think that if it's conscious in people's minds, that might change. So it might be that in a remote setting, what you would do then is build in, okay, let's go away and reflect on that, and then let's come back together and see how we feel about it. I think what you have to do in a remote setting is bring to the surface a lot more things that you might do unconsciously when you're in a physical environment together. So you have to be more deliberate, and that does mean that you're not as organic. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. But if you're neither deliberate and you just rely on operating in the same way, then I think that's where things might start to fall down and where things get missed. Yeah.
I think that's a really good explanation of why some people find remote working very easy and others find it very difficult. And it's really if you're plugged into that reflective thought. I discussed reflective thought with quite a few people, and some of them they don't see it, right? They don't believe it, which is interesting all in itself. So the conversation also, I felt, led us into lots of different areas, and this is something that I think we'd like to discuss for the remainder of the session, perhaps, is that we are naturally connecting all the different exploration sessions that we're running, right? Whether it be on digital, AI, customer, all of them are starting to come together into one cauldron, if you like, that I think we're starting to see. I wonder if we can pick out some themes for that. Let me try and explain what I mean. I think Stuart's mentioned already the complexity of some of the decision making that has to happen in that environment is a big step up from where we've been before. If you look at employment law, how we employ people, whether you look at planet side of things, whether you look at the future, which that future looking so different to the past, in a lot of ways, that feeling that customers have changed an awful lot because they got a lot more power, a lot more information, a lot more knowledge about you. So from my perspective, the complexities are growing all the time. What are other things do you two see as some of the core themes to responsible business at its best? Who wants to go first, Stuart?
Well, I think one of them would undoubtedly for me be leadership. Whenever we get on any of these conversations, the role of leadership is so critical to that complex decision making. And interestingly, as we observed even this week, the models for leadership need to evolve, right? A lot of people for many years have been following situational leadership models, of which there's various, and they're all, again, brilliantly intended. And I think it's because, and why does it need to evolve? Well, because employees, customers, it used to be the what and the why, but it's now also the how, right? And none less is true for leadership, right? It's not just the situation and how you handle that from a business need, employee need, customer need perspective, but it's very much the how, with these different operating models and different ways of working and different ways of engaging. The how bit, it tends to be missing from an awful lot of these leadership models, right? And therefore, I think we need to really think long and hard around how we layer on top of the existing situational leadership constructs with new things that talk about the methods based off of these different ways of working, etc. And I think that's a really interesting addition to that will really help companies really understand where their strengths are and their weaknesses, to be able to manage these things better than they are today.
I totally agree. I'd like to add something to that mix. I think the opposite of leadership is followship, and how you follow somebody these days also has to change. I think if we're not careful, that art is being lost. Too many people are thinking themselves as a leader, or they're leading their own lives. How do we follow well? And how do we follow the intention of the person that's leading? I've spoken to an awful lot of people that are using a subset of leadership to guide their followship. Now, that's not really the same. It's not the same thing. It might be a little unfashionable in some ways. Everyone has to be a leader. Well, some people have got to follow a direction without giving up your own brand, as Maria would say. So you've got to be able to do that as well. And I wonder if that's something else we could throw into the mix there. Subject I really like debating quite some time. Maria, what else are you sort of throwing into that mix?
I'm throwing into the mix something that we started the journey on at the start of this year, which was around digital transformation and then moving that into AI. And we started it because we were talking with so many companies who, when you ask them what they're doing in terms of digital and their transformation projects, of which many companies are running, everybody that we spoke to pretty much said to us they would rather jump out of a burning window than deal with the transformation that they were dealing with. And I do think that responsibility sits somewhere within that. We have an industrial level of frameworks and outsourcing that takes place. And responsibility, I think, can get lost, or it can get put down in a framework like a RACI model. You've got a stream of the R is the responsibility, but actually we don't talk about what that person or that team might be responsible for. And if it does go wrong, how do you deal with that as a whole company? So we end up, I think, I've been guilty of it. I see it a lot, outsourcing our responsibilities to either some sort of framework on an Excel spreadsheet, some big consulting firm, or a big tech company. And then we say, well, we can't do anything about that, or we'll have to find a workaround. And so that's what I would throw into the mix at this stage as well.
That's really good, Maria. I really like that. That's a different direction, but it's really good. I was just reflecting then on the conversations we had a while ago about the post office scandal. And I guess that's a really good example that who was responsible. You can't figure who's responsible in the end. You can figure who
it's not
the bad actors, bad things, but ultimately who's responsible for that situation?
Yeah. And it's not to say everybody who, if there's a failure, that it's because they're a bad actor or they've been irresponsible. That's not what it's about. It's about it's about someone recognizing, oh, I'm responsible for this and it's not working. So therefore, it's my responsibility to kind of raise this up, and so that whoever the collective we is, can do something about it. So it's sort of removing almost like the punitive approach to managing the failure of responsibility, but uplifting perhaps and expanding the role of responsibility within within people's sphere of work.
it's interesting. We'll have to model that. Stuart, you got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think there's horses for courses, right? I think if there's irresponsible, decision making / action, then there's certainly a course of action for that, and I think post office, is a good example of irresponsibility, right? I think, but as you say, many companies, most companies, it's not that they're acting irresponsibly. They just might be struggling to optimize their decision making across the complexity of all their stakeholders, and not really understanding or appreciating the consequences of that decision making to some of those stakeholders, right? So they might end up prioritizing, I don't know, shareholder for very good reasons, for the sustainability of the company and all sorts of reasons. But actually, if they're not eyes wide open to the consequences on their broader stakeholder group, then they may not be taking the optimum level of responsibility across the lot, right? And I think it only works when it all works, of course, the famous quote, and I think none is less true for responsibility.
I do agree again, really strongly on that one. I think a lot of the discussions we've been part of, you can sometimes in the diversity and inclusion, this has happened. You're acting really responsibly for one group, but if you were honest, not for the majority. Now, who's to say that's not right? That's not the right thing to do, because it might be the right thing to do. Okay, but you've got these decisions are really difficult. Finding a way forward in this new environment that we're coming into, I think is really, really difficult. You can see why people back away from it. To be honest, you can see why people shrink back and say, well, this is all too difficult. I think part of what we're about is trying to help people in those environments I think this is where we're getting to the core of where we are, is to try and help people in those environments to make those difficult, complex, balanced decisions where there's no right answer. So you're trying to avoid the wrong answer, as in post office situations. You're trying to avoid those really bad decisions. But what percentage of right are you, and for whom, is sort of where a lot of leadership, a lot of decision makers are now on a macro and micro level. And it seems to me that there's a lot of things to balance in this environment that we're looking into. I just mentioned we have the diversity and inclusion this week, and we're looking at some of the complexity in that diversity and inclusion group. So it'll be a good segue into that group, as well as some of the terminology that sometimes gets in the way in that environment. Last couple of thoughts from you guys on where you think we're going with this sort of core theme of helping decision making. Maria, perhaps first, then we'll finish with Stuart.
I mean, I think for us at the fellowship, what we're still doing is kind of unpicking like you say, Carl, the complexities and challenges around decision making and the consequences of that, and responsibility is absolutely coming out as like the key theme around companies being able to move forward. So you get that right, lots of other things will fall into place.
Yeah.
And then I think where we're going is around how we help individuals and companies to navigate through from that sort of discussion and debate into decision and into seeing forward into the consequences through perhaps more interesting ways than than just simply consultants that come in and do a sort of do a kind of an evaluation telling you what you kind of already problems that you already know you have, but you don't really have the sort of you need something that's deeper than that to be able to really get hold of the priorities and like Stuart said, how do you balance all of the stakeholders, and how do you start to see that landscape a bit more clearly?
Stop outsourcing your responsibility in a way. Interesting. Stuart.
Yeah, I think when we started the FRB, we were there to try and create engaging conversation between like-minded companies to see to see what the art of the possible was and to document wisdom, right? We talk about the wisdom, and we've created numerous articles about the wisdom that's coming out of this. But interestingly, as the time goes on, I think our role is becoming much more one of being, the catalyst or the stimulus for these companies to really, take their thinking, on to new levels, different levels. And some of it is obviously reinforcing existing patterns of thought, but the more we can stimulate and be a catalyst, the more we're going to see responsibility change, and that's what we set this out to be. So it's exciting.
Excellent. So we're really talking about stimulating thought inside. Don't outsource your thought and your responsibility. Do it yourself, and we'll help you do it. So fantastic. Thank you, guys. Really good Friday vibe again. I do love these completely unscripted sessions where we dive into things. So look forward to speaking to you all next week. In the meantime, have a